I'm Phil Clawson. I lead a sustainability and corporate responsibility strategy consultancy called CSR Lab, and I've been involved with the prior iteration of this conference, the Sustainable Brands New Metrics Conference, for a number of years. Really passionate about actually trying to solve big problems and measuring our progress in doing so, as well as measuring our ROI that we're generating for all parties involved. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart, and a community near and dear to my heart, and I'm excited to be here with everybody today. And I will just kick it over to you, Peter, if you want to then introduce yourself, and then we'll go around the Zoom.
Yeah, sure. So, hey guys, my name is Peter Wang Yemdal. I'm one of the co-founders and chief marketing officer at Repurpose Global. We're one of the world's first plastic credit platforms, helping purposeful companies and businesses and individuals go plastic neutral by empowering innovators on the front lines of fighting plastic pollution and fighting for our planet's future. Personally, I grew up between China and Norway, so two polar opposite of places. Here I am, and yeah, excited for the conversation.
Thanks, Peter. Casey?
Thanks so much, Peter, or Peter and Phil, for passing the mic over to me. I'm Casey Stricht, principal of Solve Innovation Future, which is the philanthropic investment vehicle associated with MIT Solve. MIT Solve is a marketplace for social impact. We source entrepreneurs from around the world who are laser focused on solving the world's most pressing problems. You got to meet one of my favorites, not that we have favorites, entrepreneurs in just a minute. Stephanie and I work very closely together. And so we find entrepreneurs from around the world who are focused on solving the world's most pressing problems, and then we bring them into the Solve family and look to create transformational partnerships or source transformational partnerships for those teams over the course of the academic year. So we've been doing this work for about 4.5 years. We've just selected our newest cohort of solvers at the end of September, and we now have about 180 in the portfolio overall. Last year we had about 2,600 applications from 135 countries, and we selected 35 solver teams. My role is then to make direct investments in those teams and support them over time. So that's me. Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Casey. Welcome. And Stephanie,
yeah,
rock star of a partner of Casey.
I don't know. Thank you so much. And Casey, the feeling is mutual. Excited to be here with everybody. My name is Stephanie Benedetto, and I'm the Queen of Raw. I come from a family of over 100 years in the fashion and textiles business. And as much as I loved the industry, I just disliked all the waste it produced. And it's bad for people. It's bad for planet, but it's also bad for profit. And so we built Queen of Raw as a global marketplace for fashion brands and retailers to buy and sell their unused textiles, keep it out of landfill, and help them turn what would be pollution into profit. And we wouldn't be where we are today if not for incredible strategic partners like Casey and the Solve Innovation Futures team. And so I'm really excited to talk about how we work as a startup with for-profits, non-for-profits, government, investors in order to do what we do. And so far we've saved over 1 billion gallons of water. So we're excited to go change the world with everyone.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stephanie. And I was remiss. I had asked each of us to share one little known fun fact about ourselves, and I did not model that well. So just to personalize us, since we're a small, tight group here, and may invite folks to come up and share your video and audio to ask questions to make it a little bit more like that instead of a webinar. But I'll just share something about myself. I founded a LGBTQ flag football league in Boston like 22 years ago, and I've played in it most years since then. Casey, or anybody in popcorn style who wants to go next? Fun fact.
Oh my gosh. Well, I guess my most recent fun fact was that I realized the two things that I have really focused on during coronavirus time have been reading spy novels and baking no-knead bread, and that now I really consider myself an expert on no-knead bread and spy novels. And maybe I should be more embarrassed about that than I actually am.
Yeah, that's needed. That's awesome.
Yeah, that is definitely awesome. My fun fact, I am a competitive sailor. So doing what I'm doing for my kids, but also for the outdoors, which I love and I'm passionate about.
Brilliant. Peter?
So maybe something different. I have two birthdays. So I have a biological birthday and a passport birthday. Those who probably were born in China and India will understand. Parents, actually my mom changed my birthday so I can go to school a year earlier because of the cutoff of the school year. So yeah, something different, I guess.
Hey, double the present, right? Great. So I want to make this as interactive a session as possible, especially given that we have such a nice intimate group of folks on the hopping call right here. So a couple of audience points of participation. So right now, for those who didn't hear me say this before, in the chat you should see at the top of it some questions from us for you to share your organization, your function, and why you chose this session. And then throughout, add any questions in the chat as well. And then also you'll see a polls, a place that says polls. And if you click into that and then click session instead of event, it has the polls that we are asking in this session. Unfortunately, every time you go into it, you have to toggle over to session. And these are all multiple choice, but you're only allowed one. So we see some folks already filling it out. First question is, what best describes your primary affiliation? We've got a couple of folks from SMBs, startups, proprietorship, social enterprise, and NGO. And then the second question is, what is your organization's experience level with multi-party partnerships in solving complex problems? And we've got about 5 votes in here, and it's a nice spread between no experience, a little experience, moderate level of experience, and lots of experience. So, it's an interesting spread with the session here. A bit later, I'll open up another poll for you to weigh in on. But for now, thanks for filling out that poll. Those of you who have, those of you who haven't, feel free to add in there. And again, in the chat, keep sharing. You can also now add in the chat a fun fact about you if you want to join in on that and share that as well. Yeah. So that's that. The structure for this session, just to give you all a sense of it, is we're breaking it up into thirds. So the first third, each panelist is going to share their perspective on this topic in a couple of different ways. And then the middle third, we're going to have a fireside chat as a panel. And then the last third, we're going to have audience Q&A. So start thinking about the questions that you have, add them throughout, and we'll probably, if you're camera ready and willing to, pull you up to actually ask your question once we get to that point of the agenda. So yeah, so just to kick things off, so topic is building and financing external partnerships to solve complex problems. And the reason that this is even a thing is because for complex problems, they are not solvable by one single entity. They require lots of organizations, lots of sectors pulling together in order to move the needle on complex. So if we want to actually solve for climate change, if we want to actually solve for circularity, if we want to actually solve for racial justice, if we want to actually solve for any of the myriad issues that we care about that are complex problems, it can't just be a sole act. One company, one government, one NGO is not going to solve those problems. It requires collaboration and partnerships. And it also requires investment and it requires finance. So that's the purpose of this talk and the context to set us up. I would love to start us off. Casey and Stephanie have been working together for a while now, and for their section here, I wonder if you might just have a conversation with each other and discuss how this partnership has worked and what you've learned from it and the value and what you want to share with us about how you've made this work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Phil. Casey and I are really excited to be here, and we thought we'd kind of go back and forth a little bit. I wanted to kind of start with what originally attracted me as an entrepreneur and having a startup to MIT Solves program. As a startup, right? we're looking for all different kinds of partnerships to help us support us, right? We need accelerators to get going. We need competitions and awards to get that kind of press. We need strategic partners and early adopters and first customers, you name it, right? And why do we spend time doing all this stuff? We do because it's so critical to build that base and that support early on to get the incredible right feedback and mentorship and financing that is so critical for us. And we found that, in certain programs really stand out far and away apart from others in how they structure the program and in the value that they give you. And that was why we looked to MIT Solve. I first kind of was Googling around. I'm always looking at every competition and startup award and impact and sustainability that's out there to be able to participate in that I think can provide value. And the way MIT Solve structures it, it truly is not just like a one and done little competition. It is a community for entrepreneurs to really build long-lasting, powerful, profitable businesses. And seeing that and seeing the way it's not just like you get up on stage and do your presentation, although we did do that and we really honed our pitch and our presentation skills, but it was also about building a community going forward. And the months that followed and continue until today, the feedback and the mentorship that we get, the actual customers that we got, and the value for our business has been a game changer for us, and was so excited to be obviously a part of their community early on and to now have continued the relationship with Casey really deeply. One interesting thing that I kind of wanted to call out, and then I'll let Casey chat a little bit too, but as enterprise customers come to look for new solutions, right? It's really important for entrepreneurs and startups and social impact to stand out, to get their word out, to get their mission and their vision out. And, sometimes it takes a ton of people, right, and support to make that happen and for people to understand what you're doing. And through the MIT Solve program, we had a judge who watched us pitch and present, and she was an incredible leader of at a major enterprise corporation, a Fortune 500 company, who emailed us right after the competition and said, look, we love what you're doing, let's talk. And it has since led to a really strong relationship and enterprise customer for our company. We're now building out our first public story and use case with them. I don't know if that would have happened without the opportunity, obviously, that MIT Solve gave us and the stage to do that. And those are kind of the early adopters and the believers in the support that are so critical early on to getting to the next stage when you're tackling these massive, massive problems. And so my experience with MIT Solve has been absolutely unbelievable for our business. And we'll chat a little bit more on kind of our ongoing relationship together and what we've built together. But early on, having this kind of introductions and support in how you think about your business model, especially as a for-profit mission, a for-profit business with a strong social mission. You need that. We all need that, and together. And so thank you, Casey, for that and believing early on through that program. And anyone involved as an entrepreneur in impact, definitely check out MIT Solve. Their programming and spans a wide array all over the world, and it's powerful. So then I'll let.
That's very sweet. I think it's very kind, but I do think Stephanie really hit on how we think about partnerships, and if that's kind of the focus of our conversation today. We saw a couple of things, and our ethos really is focused on social entrepreneurs who have impact at the core of what they do, but are still and can still build viable business models. And I think that's really, we have not as a field really thought about what does that middle space look like, right? We've said, oh, we have nonprofits that are tackling social issues, and we have for-profits that can grow really fast. And that's pretty much never the twain shall meet. And certainly we've seen over the last decade that that's started to change, particularly with the rise of impact investing. But I think MIT Solve is really focused on that middle ground of entrepreneurs who, with the right support, can build or commercialize in a really thoughtful way. And that our role is then to support or meet those founders where they are. And that it sometimes is actually just asymmetrical information that allows some founders to get access to the appropriate type of funding, be it high octane growth equity or venture debt or whatever that might, or even grant funding, depending on the sort of ultimate objective of the founder themselves. But that what we can do is actually create that platform that looks at not only matching the right type of funding, but also thinking more holistically about where the founder is, what their impact objectives are, and what they hope to achieve. So really thinking through even what are you hoping for in 5 to 10 years? Because there are lots of impact entrepreneurs who probably have viable business models, but maybe want to own or operate. And so in that scenario, it's not necessary to pursue sort of high octane growth equity, and we can come up with some other partners that may be able to support you in a different sort of growth trajectory over time. So we do try to think holistically about impact, about business model, and about supports and partnerships along the way. And so what we love, and I think has been so lovely about working with Stephanie, is that this idea is using technology that is very much sort of market focused, right? So this is not necessarily something that's a totally independent idea that has never been executed before, but rather, why can't we use this to get better outcomes for the climate, for more broadly sustainability outcomes that we care about? And so helping Stephanie get a leg up so that we can keep that impact at the core becomes really important, because there's certainly, I think that you can quickly lose the impact lens if you're not thinking holistically about how an entity grows over time. And I think when we find folks that are doing excellent work, and I always, the sort of nail in the coffin would be the negative way to say it, but the kind of most remarkable part about what Stephanie's doing is that she's actually able to measure systemic impact. And so that catapults her even further into this proof point for the field more broadly of, hey, not only can we actually look at the impact and actually have impact, but we can actually measure that impact and then share that out with the field more broadly. So I think that Stephanie's really sort of the model social entrepreneur of caring about impact, focusing on impact, using that to develop a really sustainable business model, but actually pulling best practices from the field of both sort of tech-driven supply chain management and a kind of very traditional sustainable business model that allows her to grow and scale over time. So I think we see really interesting pieces in what Stephanie does, and then our job is then to meet her where she is to help support that and make sure we're pulling from each of the sectors: strategic partners, funding partners, thought leadership, et cetera.
And you've gone above and beyond doing that. I mean, they, in addition to obviously bringing us these customers and these platforms, and we did get a grant through the MIT Solve program, they actually came into our latest financing round, recognizing what we were looking to do and the value that was there and the opportunity, but needing the dollars and wanting to build something massive, right? And seeing and understanding that. And now post-investment, one of the things I've been so excited and my team's been so excited about working with Casey and her team on is, to her point, actually measuring that impact. So many times as, for-profit businesses with a strong social mission, we have these beliefs, but how do you measure it, right? And then how do you actually, once you measure it, talk about what you're doing? And so often I feel like we get caught up in the people and planet side of the work that we do, which matters so much because at its core, that's why we do what we do. But we forget about the profit side. And these solutions that we're building, talking about partnerships, right? You need customers and it needs to make economic sense for them. Otherwise, why would the biggest brands and companies in the world adopt and purchase your solution for real value? And that's something that Casey and her team have helped us so deeply dive into is, we built a really cool enterprise software that lives behind our marketplace that helps businesses quantify things like the amount of water, the toxins, the energy, and the dollars saved by the actions they take buying and selling this waste as opposed to manufacturing new. And I think that has been, so valuable, diving into the reports with industry experts like Casey even deeper and her team, and being able to build out this algorithm backed by data to figure out, based on these actions, what is the impact this is having on our enterprise customers? Most importantly, what's the ROI? And when I say ROI, obviously it's return on investment, but return on impact. And so we take those measures of water and toxins and energy saved. We also ascribe a dollar value to them because there are dollar values in those savings, and to show why bottom and top lines improve when our customers adopt this kind of a solution. And getting it to that next level and building out our dashboard and our tools and our software, definitely would not have been possible without Casey and her team and the amazing interns that they have provided us with, especially, as you're building out something, you need a team and you need to grow and scale and think about how you're going to do that. And this opens us up to a whole world of possibilities of what we can offer our customers, but of also how we can do more faster because we've got incredible partners and people working with us, that are believe in the vision and the mission and the dreams. So that definitely has been so exciting that we actually came away with like a tangible product together and a tangible result that, happened because of it. So really excited, obviously, knowing that it's just the beginning of hopefully what's a long-term relationship as we grow this together. Kind of a final thought from me. One thing that I wanted to mention in terms of partnerships for us is the role, in addition to the work we're doing with Casey and others, is the role of government. We do work with, we're based in New York City, and we do work with New York City government, among others, in order to work towards these circular city initiatives, right? Because we can have great solutions and we can get enterprise company adoptions, but it also helps when you have government, right, supporting what you're doing. And so for those interested, check out the New York Circular City Initiative. We just released a white paper showing how much money and jobs can be saved and created by adopting these kinds of circular solutions. And so excited, to work with Casey and others as we roll out even more of these and quantify it for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And I'll let Phil, you jump in and we can talk more about the specific later on.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you both for sharing that story. And I think it highlights a number of things, including even when a partnership starts with just a few different partners, it often can glom on and bring in other partners along the way to amplify the impact. So that's great. Peter, would you like to share a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, for sure. Happy to. Let me just pull up my as well. You guys see it?
Yes.
Perfect. Great. Yeah. So I think let's just sort of talk a little bit about the business model of Repurpose and how we work. I think because partnerships as a marketplace, just like Queen of Raw, I think is, the model itself is a partnership in itself. And I think will be helpful for us to talk about that a little bit, and then have some sort of summarize some learnings just from our journey of working on both sides of the ecosystem. And sort of open up for discussion from there. But just on a high level, I think the challenge that we address at Repurpose is the fact that our world is not dedicating nearly enough money, enough capital to solving the most critical challenges in our generation. Climate change, within climate change, plastic pollution, where our world literally needs $30 billion every single year additionally to effectively stop plastic leakage from the environment. Can you hear me? So? Oops. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, sorry, I was just saying that, we need $30 billion of additional capital every year to actually effectively address this issue and effectively stop plastic from leaking into the environment. But on the other hand, I think we realize the fact that consumers are across the world, and that fact is leading to where consumers all over the world are really demanding this sort of immediate action on plastic pollution from companies all over the world. And the challenge that we see in the companies trying to meet that demand is the fact that plastic is such an impossible thing to eliminate because it's virtually part of every supply chain on this planet today, where it's a necessity of the convenience economy that we have built for ourselves. And companies find it extremely frustrating and difficult to actually wrap their heads around this topic. And that's sort of where we bridge these two pieces of the puzzle together. On the one side, the pain point from the brands, on the other side, the need for innovators to scale up their solutions against plastic pollution. And where we have developed this plastic credit platform, two-sided marketplace, where on the one side, we help these companies go plastic neutral by financing environmental action, while on the other side, that financing is going towards vetted projects on the ground to eliminate as much plastic waste from nature as these companies and brands use in their packaging and in their operations. So for us, like this is sort of the translation of that partnership model, and on both sides of the equation into and productize that partnership model where we help companies achieve this and become plastic neutral certified by number one, calculating their footprint, funding, number two, funding the removal of plastic from the environment, verifying that impact, and then finally advising them and helping them on actually reducing the amount of plastic they use in the supply chains going forward. And this is sort of where this is the bread and butter of our work, because we are interfaced, right? We help brands do this and accomplish this, and we fulfill that promise of brands going plastic neutral by working with this incredible global network of vetted circular economy projects across the world, now in 3 different continents and 8 different countries and over 11 different projects, where what we're doing here is funding supply chain interventions and projects that would have otherwise not happened if it wasn't for the financing from brands and companies who are doing this and stepping up and going plastic neutral. So for example, tackling plastic that completely lacks any economic value, like wrappers and plastic bags and takeout boxes and etc. Plastic waste that without the financing would have been left to rot in the environment and otherwise sort of not been captured in a loop, to all the way to sort of financing completely new infrastructure in areas, vulnerable geographies in rural parts of developing world or in island-driven nations where they just don't have enough capital, private sector or government to invest into building new facilities and plants and equipment to actually solve this problem on the ground. And all the way to scaling up sort of early stage innovations that actually in the reduce and reuse and redesign space, innovations and great, amazing platforms like Green and Raw and others that are doing great work when it comes to actually reducing the amount of plastic waste that are actually preventing it from entering the environment, and then using this platform to fund not only change that is in dealing with plastic in the environment, but also dealing with actually trying to systematically avoid plastic from ending up in the environment in the first place. And in doing so, I think we're super excited to sort of have now removing now over 1.5 million pounds of plastic from the environment every year. And that's really exciting, just sort of a testament of how we have built up this partnerships-driven model where we are abstractifying and we are making this process of creating environmental impact incredibly simple and accessible for companies all across the world. So just in this work of sort of working with 11 partners on the one side, now working with over 70 brands on the other side of the equation, having structured really like hundreds of partnerships in every sort of relations that we have. Some of the learnings that we have found in sort of how you can build as an entrepreneur, as a consultant, as a brand, how do you think about wrapping your head around building effective partnerships? There's five things I would identify. So number one, I think it's important to understand that supply chain and internal change must complement external change and vice versa, right? There's a lot of focus on companies, doing both, right? There's, companies having to change the supply chains, but also there's not enough necessarily focus at the moment where, there are things that companies have to come together and brands have to come together in order to make a collective difference. And that financing gap of funding innovations that are either too expensive, that are inaccessible, that don't protect product quality in a way that plastic does, for example, these alternatives, these are solutions that need to be invested up together and companies to come together to make a difference. Number two, I think it's important that a lot of partnerships and sustainability, I feel like in the 2000s and still, in the past decade as well, has been built for enterprise customers, for large conglomerates, bespoke sort of frameworks and relationships where it's not very replicable, it's not very scalable, particularly scaling down to the vast long tail small medium enterprises that clearly don't have the bandwidth or the ability to chase after very complex sustainability partnerships. So I think we have to build a framework that accounts for everybody to democratize the idea of sustainability. Number three, minimizing setup costs and making it super simple for companies to come on board and start engaging and start realizing the value add on their business and the environmental and socioeconomic impact they can create. But then, so getting them on board in an easy capacity, and then using that entry point to be able to increase your options for where you can take that company from there. That's, I think, is an important principle for anybody looking to work with companies small and large to break into the door and actually start working and start adding value and scaling from there. Fourth, I think it's important that sustainability cannot looked at as sort of in a silo. For this to last and for this to add value, I think we spoke about, Stephanie spoke about return on impact, return on investment. Translating that concept of ROI, which we speak a lot about on a higher level, to me is adding quantifiable value to multiple teams within those ventures and within those companies. And for us, it's about not just about the environmental impact. It is about storytelling, it's about marketing, it's about branding. And I think those two things got to go hand in hand, and multiple others with operations and supply chains got to go hand in hand to make a difference. And last but not least, I think, we're in this B2B world, right? Like where we're talking to businesses, where we're thinking about how to get businesses and governments to make a difference. I think it's incredibly important for any sustainability partnership, even if it's a business and vendor relationship, to activate the true advocacy power of the consumer, whether to engage them, to bring them along this shared journey, where companies can go plastic neutral, individuals can go plastic neutral, and there can be a relationship there. But it can also be many other ways where in doing so, you can produce thought leadership and produce content and interesting sort of calls to actions for you to work with you and engage your customer base and consumer base to be able to get them on a journey that is actually get buy-in from customers that at the end of the day are one of the key beneficiaries of anything that we do on the corporate side within sustainability. So so there's just some quick thoughts there, I think we'll have to take it from there.
Thank you so much, Peter. I love the distillation and summation into the 5 lessons at the end there. I thought that was really valuable. So quick check-in on the audience in order to continue to have some interactivity. We opened up a new poll in the poll section. So if you toggle over to poll and to session, thanks everybody who filled in before. We have a couple of large companies, a couple of SMBs, a social enterprise and an NGO here, and we've got a range, but heavily weighted on moderate and lots of experience. That's great. The third question is, what is your biggest barrier to building and financing external partnerships to solve complex problems? So one caveat here is Hopin only allows multiple choice with a single answer. So in order to answer this in Hopin, you're only able to choose one. So apologies for that structural limitation, but it might help you focus on what the biggest challenge you see is. And then if you want to add additional challenges that we didn't capture here in this list, or if 3 of these plus one other are really your 4 big challenges, feel free to throw that into the chat. We can continue that there. So take a minute here, think about what your biggest challenge is, what this barrier is to building and financing external partnerships, and add that in. All right. So I'm gonna, as you're answering that question, I would also encourage you to add any questions you have for the panel into the chat. And I'm going to launch into the sort of the fireside chat section here, and just have a conversation with Peter and Casey and Stephanie with you on some of these issues. And then as we get additional audience questions, we can pepper them in. We can have people raise your hand to join up on stage if you want to ask your question live. I think we're small enough to do that handily here. Or you can just add it to the chat and we'll add it. But Peter, first question is for you. What types of complex problems are currently being addressed? We looked at plastic impact, and you've shared that, and Stephanie and Casey talked about Stephanie's Queen of Raw organization and circularity around fashion. But what other types of complex problems are being addressed by partnerships? And as sort of a follow-on to that, are there any that aren't yet but should be, or any that any big challenges that this would not be a So any element of that you want to tackle? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I just want to clarify the question, Phil. Are you asking about other problems that we are not addressing, like these, 2 case studies that we're showcasing? Because I think there's a lot of problems in the world that we are not addressing or now addressing concretely. But I guess I'm a little bit, I just want to clarify on the question a bit.
Yeah, I mean, so are there any other complex problems that are being addressed by partnerships that you're aware of, as sort of a first tip? And anybody can hop in on that also. So are you aware of partnerships that are trying to address, XYZ other big societal challenge, environmental or social?
Yeah, I think there's a lot, right? I think there's definitely a bunch, and I think if you think about archetypes of models, there's also a lot. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of innovative ones coming up as well, aligning multiple. I think this whole conference is about multi-capital approach, right? So looking at, for example, I think a great example of this is circulate capital, which I know we spoke about a little bit earlier as well. I think it's interesting to sort of is working with brands. I particularly find a lot of interest in the intersection between impact investing and sort of corporate innovation. I think there's a lot of interesting things there happening as well. So I think there's a lot, I guess. I don't know. I mean, we'd love to. If anybody else wants to add on to anything else, but I guess the answer is that there's a lot of approaches. I probably don't think we can do a landscape analysis on this.
Sure. Yeah. No time for that. But any that pop into mind, Casey or Stephanie, that you're particularly impressed by, or?
I was going to say you should, Stephanie, maybe talk about your corporate partnership from an accelerator perspective. I don't know if that's.
Oh, yeah.
SAP work.
So, I mean, there are obviously certain partnerships that come to mind clearly that make sense for businesses and startups to come together. For us, as we were building our solution, Peter, to what you were talking about earlier, we have a customer-facing side of what we do, kind of our freemium version on queenofraw.com, but then we have an enterprise side of what we do that lives behind Queen of Raw. And as we were growing the enterprise side of what we do, we realized we had a challenge, right? We had a challenge around how quickly and easily we could get big businesses with a lot of stuff, all of their unused inventory and waste, into our engine so we could start our marketing and selling of it and do what we do best. And so we realized that we needed a partnership to solve that. And the partnership that we did, and we just went through their programming, was with SAP. We identified them as the right partner because obviously they're a leader in software. They hold a lot of this data around where the waste is and what it is. But historically, that's, they have the information, but that's where it ends. They're not in the business of obviously marketing and selling this waste. So we partnered with SAP. We have a full enterprise integration with them. And now with the click of a button for our customers who are majority are already on SAP, we can click a button and pull all the unused inventory and waste directly into our engine and then start our matchmaking, our selling, and our data capturing. So I think that, to Casey's point, that's a good example of, a partnership which has obviously helped us grow and scale. And it's also helped SAP. We want good partnerships need to be mutually beneficial, right? And so for us, we obviously wanted the integration so we could get the data quickly and easily. But SAP was obviously wanted this because they don't market and sell. They're not a marketplace marketing and selling waste, nor are they capturing the sustainability data and analytics that we are. So it was mutually beneficial and supportive for each other to go out there and to get these big enterprise customers together. So, just one example of where we can find, good corporate partners coming with startups and a little bit of thinking outside of the box as we do as startups and entrepreneurs to solve challenges. And, I think part of that partnership is also what helped, Casey, correct me if I'm wrong, but investors and others to see the massive value in what we're doing. I always find sometimes for startups early on, it's, not easy, but you can get pre-seed funding, you can get seed funding. But as you start getting into Series A, B, and beyond, right, as an impact investor, how do you show the value beyond just the impact side of what you're doing, that this is a massively scalable business and we are building Alibaba done right and going to change the world, right? And you need that.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting from an investor perspective, what Stephanie has just pointed out in terms of the sort of the momentum. I mean, it's like a momentum trap for social entrepreneurs more than anything else. And that investors want to see some sort of indication of potential scale, but founders can't really get that without the investor support. So I do think having some of these aggregators or marketplaces early on that are thinking about uncommon partnerships that might not necessarily, a textile marketplace isn't sort of a logical place immediately for SAP to go, but that partnership was able to drive so much more growth for Stephanie. And I certainly see with a lot of our entrepreneurs, that proof point, that first like big contract, right? Like that ends up being the valley of death for so many of entrepreneurs, particularly social entrepreneurs, because the world knows how to look at a click for service. And I'm not sure the world, meaning sort of the investing world, has a sense of, okay, how does someone like Stephanie grow? And we certainly see it, especially in some of our learning space, et cetera, that without those aggregators, you could have the most impactful software, but if you're not able to sort of integrate into the existing system, it's not particularly helpful. And so I do think that's partially why I think this is such a great partnership, and we've seen it with several of our other partners as well, is that being able to be flexible and to sort of participate in some of these holistic aggregation exercises has been really helpful for us.
Yeah, that's great. And Stephanie, what do you see as the keys to successfully creating?
Yeah, we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but it definitely has to be something that makes sense for everyone, right? When it's a win-win-win and all the parties in the partnership win and come out ahead together, how do you say no to that? And that's kind of why we have focused on leading with the profitability and the economic model of what we've built and what we do, while it also supports people and planet, and while it also adds value to our partners like SAP and others, as well as our customers. And I think when you come at it from that perspective, it really helps. It helps get customer adoption beyond just the core sustainability community, right? It's easy for us to talk to other impact investors and other impact socially conscious companies. But what about the ones, the hot messes who don't get it at all or who don't do a thing? How do we talk to them? How do we get their adoption? Because that's also how we move the needle, right? I mean, yes, you need the bottom up, but you also need the top down. And these kinds of projects as an entrepreneur, they cannot just get pushed into a corporate director of social responsibilities department. They're great. They're your brand champions. And don't get me wrong, they get you in the door and they're amazing. But sometimes they don't have the biggest budget, or they're newer to the company and they're not entrenched in how the business is done. And so when you can start bringing in, and we talk to groups within a big company like the financial officers, right? Supply chain and procurement, even the marketing officers in their storytelling, then you start to see the mass adoption and the impact you can have on these big organizations.
Yeah, getting the right people in the room is definitely paramount.
Yeah.
Casey, when you're building partnerships and when you solve, you're helping to play matchmaker and help create some of these partnerships, how do you define objectives? We had one answer, which was finding the right. One person voted for finding the right objectives being their biggest challenge. So how do you define objectives?
Yeah, I think it's sort of multifactorial, which is sort of a cop-out to a certain extent, but I think we think about objectives on partnerships, I would say at least 3 different verticals. So the first is from a growth perspective and a partnership perspective. Are we helping you access transformational partnerships? So we actually have quantified the amount that counts as transformational, and it could be anything from in-kind services to actual revenue via contract to potential for pipeline and adoption overall. So when we think about strategic partnerships, it's really around this sort of value, and can we really make sure that this is a substantive partnership? So that's typically how I think about that. When we think about partnerships from an impact perspective, so when I'm working directly with Stephanie, we think about impact on a number of different levels. Obviously, there's a financial question for us. Do we think that there's a chance that Stephanie will scale and exit so that we can reinvest? We actually reinvest all the proceeds from our fund back into future solvers. So our objective is to support solvers so that we can support more solvers in the long run. So obviously, there's financial consideration around business model, but it's also around measurable impact. And so we've aligned each of our challenges and our investees to the UN SDGs and SDG indicators, and we ask teams to report on that. And as a portfolio, we've thought about what are our objectives, and do we think that a certain number of investments will help us have accelerated movement towards these SDGs. And the last thing we think about and I'll really kind of focus on the financing part, if it's sort of strategic impact and financing, we really try to be empathetic to the entrepreneur's objectives. And I mean that both in a financial sense of truly, what are you trying to do? Do you want to own or operate? Do you want to exit? What does this look like for you? What does growth look like? And then we also try to do that from a sustainable business perspective so that we say, okay, so given those objectives, what's the right financing structure for you? Is it a revenue linked agreement? Should we build in equity buybacks? Do we just need to wait 10 years for an exit versus 5 years for an exit? And so that we have some really, we are lucky to have a flexible mandate that allows us to do that rather than pushing Stephanie to growth at the expense of really building a sustainable business.
And that's such an interesting thing. And I was going to actually ask Peter too this question, because it's something we get all the time. And Casey and I have thought about this a lot, right? We're looking to solve a problem. And so my ultimate thing is, if I've solved the problem, what happens to my marketplace if there is no more waste? And I loved when Casey and I were like ideating with, and with our lead in the round and all of our investors, what happens? And, Peter, curious how you think about that with your community as well, because for us, it's part of why we built the enterprise solution and our integration with SAP in the back end, because we're solving the problem. The Band-Aid is the marketplace, but we're also a part of the underlying solution and getting to the root of the cause. And once we do solve this issue, we've got our community into our tools and leveraging us to continue to make those benefits going forward. So it's kind of like, it's an interesting situation with impact, right? Is you hope you solve the problem, and then what happens, and how do you build a business that's going to last beyond? But Peter,
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting philosophical question as well. I think for us, like for the problem that we address, which is plastic waste, plastic is never going to go away. So plastic is always going to be a problem. I think when you operate with that assumption, I think that maybe there's a lot you can do in that sort of framework. But I think it's step by step, right? There's neutrality and offsets and credits is a starting point, but then you need to reduce plastic. You need to, so I think it's taking companies moving on to the next tier of challenges. So yeah.
That's great. Yeah, and so looking at the question also in the polls of what's your biggest barrier, the number one answer by a margin with almost 50% of the vote was finding the right partners. So would love to hear each of you take a cut at that. I know, Peter, you've got partners in both directions. You've got the companies that are funding, and then you've got the NGOs and the other organizations that are doing the work. How do you go about finding the right partners? Because there's a lot of wrong partners too, right? So it could be both about identifying good candidate partners and also about identifying bad ones and making sure you don't hop into a relationship with somebody who's going to harm the work.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's inherently different if you're looking at our recycling projects and circular economy ventures versus on the other side of the brands and the businesses. I think on the brands and businesses, we find that the most important thing is mission alignment more than anything. To me, we got companies who are working with us because they're really, the founders and executive team and leadership team is really passionate about solving this problem and believe in our approach to solving the problem. We also got a lot of companies who are interested in this, not necessarily from an impact standpoint, who are interested in this from a branding standpoint, from a consumer standpoint, from a marketing identity standpoint. So I think whatever that is, like we just have to be whoever the vendor, whoever the partner is. I mean, there needs to be alignment on what you're pursuing together and where is that core shared value that you're creating together as part of what you're doing. And then on the impact and sort of on the working with partners and on sort of getting, vendors and working with being able to deploy that capital in an effective way, I think is very much a due diligence and operational question. So I think that will probably be less relevant for the audience in that sense, because it being very plastic waste specific, it's going to be, it's about finding the right, the people with the right experience and the right operational knowledge. It's sort of like being an impact investor. Identifying the right, how do you identify the right companies to invest in as an impact investor? If your overarching objective is to invest into social environmental impact, well, I think there's a list of criteria that you would want to see there, which I don't think I have to repeat. But I mean, that's sort of, that's a bit more sector specific.
Yeah, although, I mean, it's interesting from a model perspective, because you both have to find partners as a social enterprise who will fund this. And then you also are kind of a funder and have to find partners that you can invest in that will help solve the problem, right? So you need to, you're in a middle position where you need to find partners on both ends of that equation. So I think that's a really great perspective. Casey or Stephanie, if you want to add in on thoughts on finding the right partner.
Well, for us, kind of inherent, like Peter, to the nature of a marketplace, right? It's a market, it's a community, and there are two sides to it. For us, we need to build up the side of sellers who have the supply and the unused waste to sell, and we need the community of buyers who want to buy this waste, right? And it's interesting in our marketplace. We do have an advantage and opportunity because our buyers become sellers and our sellers become buyers. So that model definitely helps with the network effects and building the community. But at the same time, it is important to what Peter said, and I definitely echo that. You need the right people who believe in your mission and your vision and willing to offer you feedback and support as you do to them along the way. Because like any business, and maybe even more so in impact, there are going to be challenges. These are real world challenges, right? And if they're going to be issues, and you need to be able to work with your community on how do we think about them? How do we solve them together? How do we work through this? And we have found that those have been the most valuable customers and also our big evangelists, right? Like they come out and they're speaking out publicly about what we're doing, and that just helps volumes, right? And obviously, like we said, our vision is to solve, right, the climate crisis. It's why we're all here, and to solve these world issues, but you need that kind of positivity and feedback and support to do it, and not just anyone and everyone can offer you. And that might mean early on, which we have done, you have to say no to some investors or no to some customers because it isn't the right fit and it could be harmful to the company early on.
Right.
I think that's kind of interesting, the say no, right? Like there's so much incentive, motivation, fear around saying yes, but sometimes it's saying no and making sure that you're like really all in on the partnership, and that there's value add on both sides. I think we see that a lot. That's a big, from our perspective, from an investing, we have 3 criteria for investment. The first is around business fundamentals, the second is around impact, and the third is really, do we think we bring something to the table? And if we don't, let's be really clear that might not be the right fit. And if we do, let's really focus on that and make sure that we're articulate about it along.
Yeah, that's great. I tried to manufacture a couple of questions from the audience from the poll responses, but if anybody in the audience has an actual live question that you want to ask, there's a join the screen section, or share video and audio in the upper right-hand part of your screen, or at least there should be. Feel free to click that, hop on in, and we can add you. I think I'll moderation panel be able to add people, or you can just type your question in the chat. While you're doing that, I will tee the 3 of you up with the final thing that we'll do after any additional questions is parting thought. So what do you want to leave folks with? What's the most salient or impactful thing you can share that people can leave this session with top of mind, either an actionable insight or an next step, or just your summation on this topic. So I'm not seeing any questions showing up in the chat. I'm not seeing anybody asking to ask in here. But give it another 10 seconds. Going once, going twice. All right. And then, so let's do our parting shot here. So, Casey, why don't you start us off?
I think, and this is probably because of the work I was actually doing this morning, which is around this topic more even than what we've been talking about. But I think from a partnership perspective, a big part of what we do, or at least what we preach, is around taking risk and supporting entrepreneurs who may not necessarily have reached a place where they are traditionally appealing to an existing market. And so I guess from a partnership perspective, I would extrapolate on that and say, make sure, or if you're true to your thesis, and if your thesis is about taking risk and saying, okay, we think there's a there, we might not have seen it yet, try to be authentic to that and try to take some of that risk. I think our job is to build a sustainable pipeline of investable businesses, and we won't build that if we don't take some risk and actually move capital and support partnerships more broadly. So for me, partnerships are about sort of living your thesis, whatever that may be. If you're an entity or a company, or if you're a founder, if you're an investor, and if to kind of be willing to take the risk on some of the crazier ideas if that's a part of your thesis, or not, depending on where you are. But.
Love it.
I'm going to push
Stephanie?
I'm going to pull on that one a little well, but mine from the lens a little bit more of kind of customers. Be willing to take risks and be willing to talk about the good work that you're doing. I feel like so often with impact, there's this, either we're talking about the big scary statistics that are out there and it feels like almost like we can't conquer these challenges, or we're not sure exactly how to measure what we're doing. So we don't talk at all about the work we're doing. And that is just detrimental and so harmful to building what we're all here talking about, this partnership and ecosystem that is going to change the world. And so, if I had one kind of final thought, it would be willing to take the risk to talk about the good work that you're doing, put it out there, support your partners publicly in what you're working on. Don't be afraid to take risks and challenges and really think differently. And instead of just talking about the scary numbers, also talk about the good work that you're doing and how these kinds of models can solve these challenges. Because I do believe now more than ever together that we will change the world.
Awesome. Peter, final thoughts?
Yeah, sure. That's I think it's hard to beat that optimistic ending, Stephanie. But I think maybe just ending in sort of more of a sort of another note. I mean, I think doing one thing really, really well, I think is something that is extremely important. Social entrepreneurs and people, companies, sustainability heads. I mean, everyone's ambitious, right? We want to achieve everything. We want to accomplish as much as possible. We're creative, passionate individuals who want the world to be different, to be a better place. And I think that brings about a lot of different ideas and pathways. I think is from a vendor's perspective, from a enterprise, from a venture perspective, I think is getting one business model down and doing that, penetrating that, like making that really and being really focused on that. And then I think even on the brand side of things, is picking a couple issues and then making a systemic impact in those issues. And to me, it seems like that is a good approach as well. So yeah, I think it's a focus. That to me, that's been my biggest learning in my entrepreneur journey and our journey of working on this. So we'd love to have that be resonating with other people as well.
That's brilliant. And my final thought would be, we've got folks here who are from large companies, from small companies, from enterprises, from NGOs, and every one of those has an important role to play in partnerships to solve big pressing challenges, and to just lean into where your strength is there. And for companies, particularly for big companies, because it looked like that was about half of our folks who are here from big companies, to not be afraid to build coalitions and partnerships that include your industry and include your competitors. I think some of the most powerful things that we've seen are multi-party within an industry. So Sustainable Apparel Coalition, and the work that Adidas and Nike and Walmart and others pulled together there is really powerful and moving the needle on things that if one of them had just tried to do it on their own, they wouldn't have been able. So don't be afraid to partner with your competitors to drive real change and to build partnerships to drive real change.